Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I get to talk to people all over Southern Oregon and Northern California about history. And wow, the history, we are going back to Camp White, World War II. And a building that is all the way in Glendale. And if you don't, Glendale, Oregon, let's find out from my guest just where that is. And you are?
Margaret Lee.
Margaret, where is Glendale?
It's actually 26 miles north of Grants Pass, Oregon.
North and you west?
Slightly west. I think it's 2 miles west of the freeway.
The important part about Glendale is its history on the railroad. Isn't that the way it got to be a town, or was it a town before that?
I'd have to defer to you.
And you are?
I am Terry Bess. I pastor the Glendale Assembly of God Church.
Well, Terry, we invited you here to talk about your church, but can you tell me a little bit about the history of Glendale?
Glendale started as a railroad town. Originally, it was named Julia. Julia, named after the man who founded the town's wife or daughter, I'm not sure, but a family member. And then later they changed it to Glendale, but it started as a railroad town. Then the timber industry thrived. There were many small sawmills sprung up around the region. With the closing down of the timber industry, the railroad is still running through Glendale. So.
And is the railroad an employer, or it just happens to travel through?
It mostly just travels through.
Oh, have I heard stories about Glendale and the Tunnel 9 and you know, the way things were. That was a main...
Yes.
And people would take the train from they'd come to Glendale and hop on the train to go to town. Or school kids would even go by train. Now, do you go back that far in Glendale?
Not really. I was born at the end of the Depression, I think. But I do remember the one thing about the name change I think took place after 1936. Was that when the town burnt down?
Yes.
The whole town burned?
Pretty much.
The whole business community burned.
Now, how did it start?
I'm not sure.
I was told that a woman was in the theater and had a lit cigarette in her hand and went to sleep. And back then the theater had a sawdust floor.
The theater had a sawdust floor?
Yes, it was across from where the Glenway Superstore is now.
Folks, I learn on this set a lot of things, but did you ever go in there? I mean, that's before your time.
Yeah. Yes, it was.
Did people talk to you about the theater? And I mean, was it a big place? And what did...
You know, I don't know that part, but I had seen some pictures that one of the old timers had, and she had pictures of Glendale before it burned.
Safe somehow. And you think about these fires, they lose everything, the town. Well, yes. Then we're really talking about Glendale and this church of yours.
Yes.
The fire predates
yes.
This church.
Yes.
But your
By
church
12
is
years.
older than that. Your congregation in Glendale is much older.
Yes.
When did it establish?
Our church began in 1937 in a tent meeting along the railroad tracks.
And I understand this is the pastor.
Yes, that's Catherine Montgomery, that later on married a gentleman named Hutto that passed away, and then she married Joe Liggett, and that's Joe and Catherine in the picture.
Uh-huh. Well, now, women pastors in your faith are not unusual,
No,
right?
no.
And in 1933, how did they happen to come to Glendale? It was probably a thriving community, huh?
It was. She was from up north somewhere, and she and another sister felt the Lord lead them to come and hold a tent meeting in Glendale. And from that, pretty quickly sprung a congregation, and they moved from the tent and purchased the property that was the former Presbyterian church.
Now, when you say the property,
Yes.
what about this Presbyterian church?
The Presbyterian church burned, and the original Presbyterian church in Glendale burned.
Now, would this have been during the same time period of the big fire, or
No,
another?
it was another fire, just an individual building fire.
Now, if I understand what you're telling me, the building burned down, but the foundation
Yes.
perfectly fine.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, the First Assembly of God Church building was built upon the same foundation as the former Presbyterian church.
And I just happened to have a picture because you were so kind last Sunday to take me there and show me that house.
Yes.
It's now a home.
Yes, it's duplexes. There's 2 duplexes.
And so right across the street was it a vacant lot or just what?
I'm not sure what building stood on the former property that we now have. So Margaret,
I believe it
may-
was a vacant lot.
And
A gentleman, did he contribute or sold it to the church?
I looked that up. Their names were Thomas and Mildred Cowan,
Okay.
and it took an exchange of money for the deed to go through litigation, and for $1 the transition was made.
oh my goodness! So
It says
yours
that
is
right
the
on the deed.
$1 church.
Yes.
I am so thrilled about this whole community. How big is Glendale?
Right now, the populace is somewhat around 850 inner city. The zip code serves a little over 2,200 people.
So you're telling me downtown,
Yes.
busy place. Back up in them thar hills, as they
Yes.
say. You have a lot of people. Well, what keeps people in Glendale?
That's a good question. Right now, the mill is still running strong. The Swanson Group has a sawmill, plywood plant, veneer plant, green and finish in. So it is the major employer.
Now you talk like you know a little thing about this.
Yes.
Your church has been through, like Glendale, some hard times, right?
I'm sure it has.
And you couldn't afford to always pay the pastor.
No, there were times when the pastor was paid with chickens and potatoes.
I am wondering, do you get any chickens or potatoes?
Not very many. Margaret's dad, before he passed away, used to tithe a quarter of his beef to the pastor, so regularly we would get a quarter of a beef. So,
That's biblical. The front left shoulder
yes,
belongs to the minister when you butcher a beef.
that was from their family. So,
What a tradition. Okay. And that is better than eggs and chicken.
always, our family was always blessed.
What a privilege. You come from quite a family. Let's talk about you.
I think so.
Let's talk about you. You're family of how many?
There were 9 children, and one brother, of course, died at the age of 12, almost 13, a few days before 13. We were raised on a farm
Where?
3 miles out of Glendale, west of Glendale in a horseshoe canyon on Reuben Road. And I enjoyed growing up.
Well, what kind of a mobile home or fancy house
Oh.
did you have?
When I was a small child, we lived in an old 2-storied farmhouse, which was built, as I remember, well, I don't remember, but I was told in 1902 it was built, and Dad replaced it with the current single-story structure in 1954.
But where does this log house come in?
That is across the railroad tracks from where the current farm is. It's one that Mom and Dad moved into shortly after I was born, and they lived there for 3 to 5 months. I don't remember exactly how
No,
long.
it's hard to remember those early
Yeah,
years.
when you're that young. But originally when they came, they had come from Alliance, Ohio. They moved to Drew, Oregon, and they were up there for 3 or 4 years.
I don't know where Drew is.
It's east of Canyonville, about 12 miles, 14 miles, somewhere in
Yeah,
there.
something like that.
And then 10 days before I was born, they moved down to Glendale, and lived in a small cabin that was 10 by 12 feet with 5 children.
Oh.
Well, the 5th one being me. And then after I was born, they moved into the log cabin.
10 by 12. I suppose this rug's a 9 by 12.
That looks
How
like
in the world? I don't know. Now, is this the mom and dad?
Yeah. That was taken when they were probably in their early 70s.
Oh my goodness. And they were the dreamers. Your dad was a dreamer that you could have a church after the fire had burned down the other one and they'd built this.
Actually, I don't know how it came about that there were a lot of dreamers in the church, that we outgrew the other church. And it became totally a physical necessity to have a bigger building.
So this one that was built on the foundation of the burned out Methodist Presbyterian church was now just too little for you.
Yes.
And then what happens? Are you the historian that can tell us this history?
About that time, the Cowans made the property available across the street. And also the church learned of the Camp White facilities, and the opportunity was made available to be able to purchase buildings there, tear them down, transport them, and reconstruct them. And so they put their resources together. The offer was for $200. You could come in and purchase the building. If you tore it down and cleaned it up real nice, they would give half of the money back.
Ooh,
Yeah.
well, 200's a lot of money back then, but
Yes.
for a whole building, I mean, this whole building, right?
That building right there, the
Now-
2-story.
Okay. Now, what do you know about that process?
Basically, I know what I've been told.
By whom? Who told
My
you that?
parents and different people
Because
in
your
church.
parents were there.
Yes,
when-
my dad was instrumental in helping to tear that building down and to put it back up. An interesting thing about him that I didn't know till the day of his funeral was that they were having a problem figuring out how to put the church back together, so he numbered all the boards in reverse order. I mean, and numbered them as they took them down, and they put them up again in reverse order.
Now you're telling me like a puzzle.
Sort of
Well,
like-
let's start with where this building was.
It was in Camp White, Oregon,
Okay.
which is now the domiciliary.
And White City and the cemetery over there was all a huge city. Third largest in the state of Oregon at the time, I understand. All built out in agate or chigger grass and little else but.
Yes.
And they built up the city almost overnight. Employment was just, if you could pound a nail, you could get a good job over there. Because war had broken out and we needed help. How did your church find out that this building was available?
That I don't know.
I have never been able to.
I remember them talking about it. I remember someone saying, well, I heard that they're selling the buildings at Camp White, and that's all I know about it.
Okay, and so they found $200 and they went to White City or and what happened next?
The youth group, it was a youth group project to start with, and the youth group, and which consisted of two of my brothers and two of my sisters, and all of the pastor's children that were of age that could go.
Pastor whom?
Pastor Elaine Louise Kinnaman, that's her name.
Okay.
And
So these young people who were teenagers, early teenagers?
yeah, ranging from 13 to 19.
So they go down, how do they travel from Glendale to White City?
Cars, back of the
In
truck.
cars, and any way
Truck.
that they could.
Yeah, any way they could get
Transport.
down there.
Well, now, I understood that there wasn't a truck involved at first.
Not a truck large enough to transport the
A
building
pickup.
back.
Okay. Why? Well, you take the story from there, because I
Okay.
love it.
Okay, they went down pretty much by faith. They had no way to transport the building back. I've been told by former pastor Roy Wood, who just recently passed away, that was pastoring in 1976 when I moved to Glendale. That so by faith they moved on site, began with a youth group overseen by gentlemen in the church, tearing the building down, and in the process discovered a man from Myrtle Creek who had a truck, and they made arrangements with him. If they would tear his building down, he would truck our church back to Glendale for us. So
For free and for nothing?
well, yes, just the exchange.
All he had to do was tear down 2 buildings
yes,
now.
yes.
And your building is not a little one.
No, it isn't. It's,
Basically a 2-story building with,
yes, I think that it's 40 feet wide and 80 feet long, if I remember right, by the measurement. So it's
what was this
two-story.
building used for, do you know?
I heard that, I was told it was an administrative building on Camp White.
Yeah, it doesn't look like the other Camp White chapels that I have found. And in case you folks wonder, yes, I'm very interested in Camp White history. I'm interested in getting people to tell their own stories, and that's why this is such an incredible opportunity to meet people who were there when. How did you go to Camp White? Did you go along with your big sisters and brothers?
No, I was one of the little kids. My mom stayed home and babysat everyone below the age of 12.
Ah.
And there was quite a crowd of them. There must have been about 10 kids that she was taking care of. But the gentlemen who were not working, or if they had a day off, everyone in the church that could go went.
Okay, and what can you tell me about your father's intention to do it the right way? I love this story, folks.
Well, actually, when it came to the finish work, there was knotty pine inside the original building, and he would not allow the teenagers to pull one nail out of that knotty pine. He insisted he was afraid they'd scar the wood.
Oh, of course. And this is the wood
Yes.
in that beautiful church when my husband Doug and I went over to worship with you, and it's gorgeous. So, yeah, if I'm pulling a nail, I'm going to dent every place I put the. But your dad had such an intentional. He wanted it right.
He wanted it beautiful. And then when they brought it back, he also matched up each board so it looked like a continuous flow, so that if you had a knot in one board where it ended, there would be a knot in the next board so that it could match and look like it had actually grown there.
Wow. It reminds me of paint by number. I mean, your dad had this vision. And now what about this $200?
The $200, there was an agreement that if they tore the building down and cleaned up appropriately to the standards of the government, that they would get half of the money back.
Okay. So your
And-
church should put $100 out there.
Yeah, they put the the $200 down. They tore it down, and the gentleman who did the final inspection came out and could not find where the original building was, so he gave them their whole $200 back. And not only could he not find their building, but he couldn't find the building of the gentleman from Myrtle Creek. He gave him his $200 back too.
If anybody knows about this fellow from Myrtle Creek, I love
It
it,
would
or
be
where
great,
those
yeah.
boards went.
Yes.
I know that material came to all of these Southern Oregon towns from Camp White because they just wanted it torn down.
Yes.
Material was excellent. I mean, pre-war, they used the best
Yes.
lumber. Can you take me through any stories you've heard from people in your church about those wartime times now you're too young to remember, right?
I remember the day of Pearl Harbor, but it's a vague memory. I just remember Dad saying, "Oh, I knew it was going to happen because they weren't watching it close enough," or something like that.
Yeah.
I was a year and a half old then, I think.
But we'd remember those days forever. Besides, I want to know a little bit more about Glendale and what makes it tick. What is the community all about in Glendale?
Right now, we're very economic suppressed, where unemployment's very high, and it has been for a long time in Glendale. But it's a very close-knit community. It's at the Swanson group, a large percentage of the people who work there commute from Grants Pass or north from Roseburg even. We have quite a few people that work out or that come from outside of town. But it's a good place to raise a family.
Oh, I have heard such good things about your school and about the churches.
Yes.
Maybe that's something we ought to talk about. How many churches in Glendale?
I'm not sure exactly right now. I know that within the last month, 5 of our churches have formed a cooperation to open a food bank, a food pantry that has just last week opened for the first time.
Well, because that's speaking to a felt need in your
Yes.
community.
Yes.
As lumbering went down and people moved away, it left a lot of... You've seen hard times in Glendale before, right?
It seems like it goes in cycles. Well,
Yeah.
it just follows the cycle of the country mostly, I believe.
Well, really, the train isn't passenger train anymore. Kids, you can't hop the train and go to Medford or Camp White. They used to commute to Grants Pass by train, and it was a main, Medford, Ashland, we were all connected by that line. The last day of the passenger train, my mom drove us down, and Father and the 3 kids got on the train and got to go in the dining car and have a Pepsi, and then she picked us up in Medford. So I was just a little kid, but that train it had been an important part of Glendale, right?
Yes.
Yes, there was a time when the only way to get down to one of the milling communities, which was called West Fork, was on a train. There was no road down there. West Fork is 15 miles west of Glendale.
Yes.
And what's left of West Fork?
Just a junction in the road.
Yeah, actually it's one foundation of a building that either fell down or burned down years ago.
I'd like to go see West Fork, because I understand that they'd come running from the mines and catch a train in West Fork, but they didn't like to stop if the people were pretty, these miners were dirty and they'd run a long way, and they weren't thought, well, they may be been robbers or something.
Yeah.
Interesting. Glendale is a wonderful town. My Ellen Roberts, I called her last night to do a little checking. She was dressed as an old-fashioned lady for one of our church functions, and she said it was an active, enthusiastic community. But that's with its own doctor and dentist. Dr. Ferguson was there. Did you know him?
Yes, I did. As a matter of fact, he delivered quite a few people who are still living in Glendale.
You know, it's a wonderful thing what we can find out about one another. And
Yes.
Dr. Ferguson's daughter is, you know, a doctor, and we're just thrilled to death. But what some of the other people, now you don't have a doctor? Do you have a clinic or what?
I think there's a dental clinic there. There's no doctor.
Well, I'm looking forward to learning a lot more about your own story. And so we've got another show coming up. You've got a few things just about that mill that you'd like to tell us.
I am bivocational. I do work for Swanson Group.
Bivocational.
Yes.
And the reason that you're bivocational and that we're filming early in the morning is?
Mostly it's expensive for a rural pastor to have insurance, and the finances are pretty tight. I came to Glendale in 1976 working for Robert Dollar Company. I worked for them for 6 years. I worked for Gregory Force Products for 10 years. And then when I became senior pastor, I left the mills for 12 years. And for 6 years now, I've been back in the mill. So.
Well, the reason you are now what we'd call a Pauline minister.
Yes.
You have your tent making
Yes.
in the mill.
Yes.
And so that's why you work in swing shift, and
Yes.
we thank you for coming early to do this.
You're
I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and tune in for more stories about the way it was and where we're going from here. Thank you so much for being my guest.
And thank you for having us, Bernie.